Hi, in this session we will cover SAP Fiori architecture. So this is the agenda. We will be discussing different app types which we have under SAP Fiori. Then we will cover the SAP Fiori apps architecture. So we will start basically with the overview of the high level architecture, and then we will go into the detail of architecture for each and every app type. So first of all, there are three types of apps in SAP Fiori, that is the transactional apps, analytical apps, and the fact sheets. So these are distinguished by their focus and infrastructure requirement. All the SAP Fiori apps can be accessed over the intranet, that is inside your corporate network. When they are accessed over the internet, that is from the outside corporate network, we have to make sure that the access is secure. So first of all, what is transactional app? So these apps will let you perform the transactional task like creating a leave request for an employee. So they represent the simplified views and interaction with existing business processes and solutions. Transactional apps, they run best on an SAP HANA database, but they can also be ported to other databases with acceptable performance. Then we have the fact sheets. Fact sheets are the apps which we use for displaying the contextual information and key facts about the central objects used in business operations. From a fact sheet area, we can drill down into its detail, which we can navigate from one fact sheet to its related fact sheet. For example, we can navigate from a document to the related business partner or to the master data. From fact sheets, we can start the transactions by navigating to transactional apps or by accessing the backend system directly. For example, from a document-based fact sheet, you can access the backend system to display the document details or to edit the document in SAP GUI or WebDimpro. Some fact sheets are delivered with an integration feature for a geographical map. We can call up the fact sheets from the search results displayed in the Launchpad, or from the other fact sheet, or from the transactional and analytical apps. The displayed data is consumed immediately from the SAP HANA database, mainly through the search models. Fact sheets run only on an SAP HANA database and require an ABAP stack. They cannot be ported to the SAP HANA Live architecture. So basically, for the fact sheets, we cannot make use of any other database except for SAP HANA. However, for the transactional apps, we can use any database. However, the SAP HANA is a preferred one. Then we have the analytical apps. These apps will let you give a role-based insight into the real-time operations of business by collecting and displaying the key figures directly in your browser. So analytical apps will combine the data and analytical power of SAP HANA with the integration and interface components of SAP Business Suite. So these apps will provide the real-time information on the large volume data in a simplified front end for enterprise control. With analytical apps, we can closely monitor our most important key performance indicators, that is the KPIs, in real time, and we can react immediately on changes in the market conditions or the operations. So to do this, we can easily use the pre-delivered KPIs and insight to action scenarios, or we can define our own based on the KPI modeling framework. Analytical apps will run on an SAP HANA database, and they will be using the VDMs, that is the virtual data model. So in this slide, we can see the first section of the slide is showing the transactional app. So it is basically access to the task like change or create or entire processes with the guided navigation. Then we have the analytical apps in between, which are mainly to provide the insights. So it will show the visual overview of a dedicated topic for further KPI related analysis. Then we have the fact sheets, which are for the search and explore. That is the view of essential information about an object and contextual navigation between the related objects. So these are basically the three app types we have in the SAP Fiori. Now we will see this few of the examples from each and every app type. So in the transactional apps, these are the few examples which we have in SAP Fiori right now. So there are many more apps which comes as part of transactional apps, but as part of this session we will be covering these three, like what are the transactional apps we have in the SAP Fiori. So the first one, with the transactional app adjust stock, you can count the products in the store inventory and make the adjustments to the account for discrepancies such as product shrinkage. So basically adjust stock is one of the transactional app which is allowing you to count the products in the store inventory, and if you want you can make the adjustment using it. So the key features for it are to perform the ad hoc inventory counting, to record the adjustments for product shrinkage, or to identify the reason for a stock adjustment. Then the second example is the approve supplier invoices. So with the transactional app approve supplier invoices, we can display the supplier invoices that are assigned to us by the SAP business workflow. So we can approve or reject the corresponding work items. If necessary, we can also forward a work item to a different employee for further processing. So we can use the standard workflow to approve completely parked incoming invoices. In addition, the app supports completely parked credit memos. In this case, the cross invoice amount is negative. So the key features of this app are, we can choose a work item from the list view and display it in a detail view. So in the detail view, we can navigate between several tabs. Like we have the attachments. So basically we can see a list of all the files that are attached to the invoice document. Depending on our browser end settings as well as the file type of the attachment is displayed either in a new browser tab or in a window of a program corresponding to the file type. Then we have the notes. So in the notes we can add notes which are displayed on the notes tab with a timestamp. These notes are only attached to the work item of the app. Then we have info. We can see information data, and in the information data we can have the history, like we can see a list of invoices we received from the current supplier and that we have already approved. So these are the several tabs which we can have in the detailed view. Then we have the you can also approve or reject supplier invoices, or we can forward them to a colleague. So in addition, the app supports the following technical feature and options. So this app will also run in the standalone mode. So basically the key features of this app will be, we can choose a work item from the list view and display it in the detail view, and secondly we can approve or reject the supplier invoices, or we can forward them to a colleague. Then we have the third example, which is a approve leave request. So why we have what is the function of this approve leave request transactional app is, with the transactional app approve leave request, we enable our managers to approve or reject the leave request for the direct reportees easily and flexibly from the desktop or a mobile device. So the key information for the approval decision is available at the glance to the managers, including a team calendar that shows the overlapping team leave request. So the key features of this app are that we can browse all the requests submitted for the approval in a personalized inbox. Also, we can view the details for specific requests, including the leave requested, the available balance, and any comments relating to the request. We can also view a team calendar that shows overlapping leave requests if there are any leave conflicts or not. We can also approve or reject the request with optimal note to the requester. In addition, the app will support the this app will also support, it can also run in a standalone mode. So these are basically the examples of the transactional apps. Now after that we have the analytical apps example. So these are the few examples which we have taken from the analytical apps. That is the all access request, analyzed requirements, analyze substitutions. So since the analytical apps are mainly meant to analyze the data, so these are the few of the example which we will be discussing in this session. So what is this all access request? So with all access request, we can identify the access request by time period or duration. We can use all access requests to explore the number of access requests which were created over a period of time, like the day, a month, week. Additionally, specific information such as the access request system connection or access request number. So we can get all this information, we can analyze all this information using this analytical app. So the key features of it are that it will allow the calculation rules, that is the days between request creation date and the current date, aggregation based on the client, request and the line item. And it will provide the general drill down also, the number of accesses, request, line items. So this is basically all the functionalities which we can get in this particular analytical app. Then we have the analyze requirements. So the analyze requirement app will enable us to analyze the ATP check results of a sales order. The app will provide us the following information for the each requirement, that is the confirmation status, that is the confirmation percentage and delays if any. Then we have the information about the substitutions that were performed by a rules-based ATP check. So to do a root cause analysis of the ATP check results, we can drill down to the schedule line information and the results of each ATP check method performed during the ATP check. So these are basically, this app is basically to analyze the ATP. The key features of it includes to analyze the requirements by grouping them under the following categories, that is the all requirements and delayed requirements. A delayed requirement is a requirement for which the confirmed date is after the requested date. So we can choose the date type, that is the material availability date or the delivery date, and then we can perform the analysis. Then we can do the requirements where a rule-based ATP check has performed substitutions. So we can sort the results of the ATP checks on different columns. We can identify the type of substitutions that the requirements underwent, and also we can drill down to the schedule line information for each requirement to analyze the check methods involved in the availability check, the results of each check method that has limited the confirmation, details for a product allocation check. So all these things we can perform using this app. Then we have the analyze substitutions. So the analyze substitution app will provide us with the aggregated information about the requirements of a sales order item that underwent substitutions during a rules-based ATP check. So basically this is to analyze the aggregated information about the substitutions. So we can view the information by product or by the location. We can identify the products or the locations that have a high number of substitutions. We can also drill down from a product substitution or a location substitution to the view which is providing us more information about the substitution. So basically we can use this app to analyze the substitutions, or if we want to go drill down further to see the detail of the substitution, that also we can do. The key features of this app involves identifying the unconfirmed sales order quantities, then identifying the patterns in the behavior of substitution of requirement. We can also use this information to improve the efficiency of future order confirmations. Then we can view a graphical representation of the confirmation status from a substitution perspective. So the graphical substitution status will show what percentage of the overall requirement for a location or product requires substitution or is still open. And we can also navigate to the app in the following two types. So from the ATP overview app or from the app launcher tile on the Fiori launchpad created by the end user from a variant in the ATP overview app. we can personalize the list of the columns that are displayed on the screen. So basically these are the three analytical app examples. Then let's move to the fact sheet example. So for the fact sheets, we have the application of funds, article and bank. So these are the few of the example from the fact sheets. So basically the application, what comes under the application of funds. So this fact sheet will display the contextual information about the application of funds business object. You can navigate to its related business objects and you can access the related transactions in the operational systems. So the key facts which we can use in this fact sheet are, this is the key data prominently displayed in the fact sheets. The application of funds fact sheet shows the key facts like general administrative information, general details about the master data object like funds, and then we can have the accounting and controlling documents posted to this document. Then the second fact sheet example is the article. So this fact sheet will basically displays the contextual information about the article business object. You can navigate to its related business objects and we can also access the related transaction in the operational system. So the key features of it are the map display. So in the article fact sheet we have the like option wherein we can do a map display. So in the site location tile we can find a map for displaying the sites. When we say the sites, it means the stores or the distribution centers based on the geolocation data and geo coordinates. Then the sites that are assigned to an article are displayed as pins. The geo coordinates are based on the address data entered for the site in the site master. The relevant sites for an article are determined using the data in the table MARC, that is the site data for the article. So the pin representing the first site that is found is situated in the center of the map and in the first place in the logistics view tile. If there is enough space for nearby sites to be displayed, they are also shown on the map. Otherwise, only one pin will be displayed. So basically, we will be able to see it in the map view. We can also move the map around by dragging it with our finger. So the key facts will be, this is the key data prominently displayed in the fact sheets. The article fact sheet will show the following key facts, that is the unrestricted use stock, the unit of measure and the count. So the article category, that is the grouping of the articles according to their attributes. Examples of an article category can be a single article, generic article, a variant, a set or a pre-pack. So after that we have the navigation target. So basically the fact sheet offers the possibility to directly access other fact sheets or to open the transactional apps. For example, this is to we can do a navigation from this article fact sheet to display the more detailed information. Then we have the note, that is these linked apps have to be already available in your system landscape or you have to implement them along with this app. So we can navigate to the following fact sheets, like we can navigate to the supplier, we can navigate to the purchase order, we can navigate to the sales order from this app. So we can access the transaction in a SAP backend system from this article fact sheet. Like we can go to the transaction MM43, which is to display the article. We can go to VKP2, which is to display the price overview. So basically we can navigate either to the another fact sheet or we can navigate to the transaction in the ABAP backend system. Then the third example of the fact sheet app is the bank. So this fact sheet will display the contextual information about the bank. So we can navigate to its related business objects or we can access the related transactions in the operational system, similar to the other fact sheet example we have just discussed. Then we have the for the navigation targets for this fact sheet are the fact sheet linked, that is we can navigate to the fact sheet like house bank or the transactions in the ABAP backend system, that is we can go to the FI03, that is to display the bank. So these are the three examples of the fact sheets we have. So basically we have covered three app types till now, that is the transactional apps, fact sheets, and then we have covered the analytical apps and the examples of them. Now let's move to the typical landscape, that is the architecture of the SAP Fiori. So first of all, this is the typical landscape, the high level overview of the architecture. So basically all the clients which are accessing the SAP Fiori apps, regardless of the app type they are trying to access, so they must support HTML5. So HTML5 is the must requirement for the SAP Fiori apps for the clients who are trying to access the SAP Fiori apps. A reverse proxy server is required for the analytical app types and fact sheets. It is recommended to use the web dispatcher, however, as a reverse proxy. Then we have the ABAP front-end server, which is recommended for all the app types, and it contains the UI components and the SAP NetWeaver gateway. Then we have the SAP ABAP backend server. So it is basically required for all the app types, and it will contain the backend business logic in data as well as the search models for the fact sheets. So the SAP HANA Extended Application Service, or we can also call it as a SAP HANA Access Engine. So it is needed for the analytical app types only, and it replicates the data from the backend server and remodels it using the virtual data models. So the underlying database can be any database for transactional apps, but it must be SAP HANA for the fact sheets and the analytical app types. So basically these are the main components which comes under the SAP Fiori app. So if we are implementing SAP Fiori app, so we should need the HTML, the clients which are supporting HTML5. After that we need to have the reverse proxy. So SAP web dispatcher is however recommended for this purpose. Then we have the ABAP front-end server and ABAP backend server. Then we need the HANA database and the HANA Access Engine for the analytical and fact sheets. However, for the transactional apps we can use any. Now let's discuss each and every component in detail, like what is the functionality of each and every component here. So starting with the SAP Web Dispatcher. So SAP Web Dispatcher lies between the internet and your SAP system. So basically it is the entry point for all the HTTP requests into your system, which will consist of one or more NetWeaver application servers. So as a software web switch, the SAP Web Dispatcher can either reject or accept the connections. When it accepts the connection, it balances the load to ensure an even distribution across the servers. So the SAP Web Dispatcher therefore contributes to the security and also balances the load in your SAP system. So basically my web dispatcher will take the request from the client, and after that my web dispatcher will contribute to the security and will do the load balancing. So it is also useful to use the web dispatcher if you only want to cover one aspect, that is the security functions or the load balancing. It is recommended that we should use the web dispatcher if we do not need the security functions, but we simply want to balance the load between the several SAP NetWeaver instances. So the SAP Web Dispatcher is recommended when we use an SAP system with several SAP NW instances for the web applications. It is a program actually that we can run on the machine that is connected directly to the internet. It requires minimal configuration, and we just have to enter the data like the port on which the HTTP or HTTPS requests are to be received, and the host and HTTP port of the SAP message server. So this is the only configurations which are required if you want to configure the SAP Web Dispatcher. That is the port, the host, and the HTTP port of the SAP message server. Then the SAP Web Dispatcher, it can also be used with the older releases of SAP systems. So the main features which SAP Web Dispatcher will perform is that it will provide the selection of appropriate application server that is used for the load balancing. Then it is used for the URL filtering, that is we can define the URLs that we want to be rejected, and by doing so restrict the access to our system. Then we can use it for the web caching, that is we can use the SAP Web Dispatcher as a web cache to improve the response times and to conserve the application server cache. Then depending on the SSL configuration, we can forward, terminate or encrypt or recrypt the request. The constraints, which there are certain constraints which are there for the Web Dispatcher. So basically the Web Dispatcher is only useful in the web environment. In the classic SAP system, the load is balanced by the message server. So the SAP Web Dispatcher will forward the incoming HTTP request to the application servers, and it will return the responses from the backend to the client. The outgoing requests, such as the request to a different SAP web application server, they are not sent via the Web Dispatcher. They are sent via the proxy server for the appropriate intranet. So basically the SAP Web Dispatcher is located between the web client and your SAP system that is running the web application. So this is like all about the SAP Web Dispatcher. Now we have the SAP Fiori front-end ABAP server. So in the SAP Fiori system landscape with the ABAP environment, we can use the transactional apps. So to set up the system landscape to enable SAP Fiori before we start to implement an app. An app requires the front-end components which will be actually providing the user interface and the connection to the backend, and the backend components which will be providing the data. So all the front-end components and the back-end components are delivered in separate products and have to be installed in a system landscape to enable SAP Fiori on that system. So my SAP ABAP front-end server will contains the UI layer with the necessary product-specific UI add-ons for the respective products, as well as the infrastructure components. So basically my front-end server, ABAP front-end server, will contain my UI components and my infrastructure components. So the infrastructure comprises the central UI add-on with the SAP UI5 control library and the SAP Fiori Launchpad, as well as the SAP NetWeaver gateway with the OData enablement. So these front-end components have access through a trusted RFC connection to the ABAP backend server, which contains the business logic and the necessary integration add-ons with the OData services and the PFCG roles for the ERP and SRM. So basically, if we talk about the context of SAP Fiori, my ABAP front-end server will provide me the capability like a web server, which will be serving the static UI5 resources to the requesting device. It will act as a gateway for the OData calls, that is routing of OData service calls to the backend that will implement the service, and it will also act as a Fiori Launchpad provider, which will be providing the services required to run the Fiori Launchpad and keeping the related data models. So these are basically the functionalities which my ABAP front-end server will provide to us. Then the ABAP front-end server will contain all the infrastructure component to generate an SAP Fiori app specific UI for the client and to communicate with the SAP Business Suite backend systems. So all the UI components and the gateway based on the SAP NetWeaver both are deployed on the same server. So my SAP Fiori Launchpad is the basis of all the SAP Fiori UIs and will provide the fundamental functions for SAP Fiori apps such as logon, surface sizing, navigation between apps, and the role-based app catalog. So my SAP Gateway will handle the communication between the client and the SAP Business Suite. Backend SAP Gateway will use the OData services to provide the backend data and the functions. Then after that, so basically my ABAP front-end server will contain my SAP UI5 plus my gateway. Then it comes the ABAP backend server. So in the ABAP backend server, the SAP Business Suite products are installed, which will provide the business logic and the backend data, including the users, roles and authorizations. So the add-ons for the SAP Fiori apps are continuously released in the support packages. So the backend server is based on the SAP NetWeaver. So to setting, there are like different deployment options which we can use when implementing the SAP Fiori. However, those we will discuss in the later sessions. So we have discussed the different components which we have like in the high level overview of the SAP Fiori landscape. So basically we discussed about the reverse proxy server, which is the entry point for the HTTP request, rejects or accepts the request and decides which server to send the accepted request to. Then we discussed about the ABAP front-end server, which will actually contain all the UI components and my SAP NetWeaver gateway. Then we have the SAP ABAP backend server, which will contain my backend business suite and the search model for the fact sheets. So backend server will be always containing my business logic. Then for the HANA Access Engine, it is used for all the analytical apps. So the transactional apps, again, they can only, these are the only app type that don't have to run on SAP HANA. So the fact sheets, analytical apps and the smart business apps, they all require HANA with no exception. So we have to use the SAP HANA if we have to use the fact sheets, analytical apps or the smart business apps. Now let's move to the next slide. So this slide is basically to tell about the communication, like how the communication is happening between all these different components. So in order to transfer application data and security credentials within the SAP Fiori system landscape, the communication must be established between the various servers using the different communication channels and the protocols. So the client will communicate directly with the ABAP front-end server by issuing HTML and OData request through an established HTTPS connection. So basically my client will send the request to my reverse proxy or the SAP web dispatcher using the HTTPS, and it will be using HTML, OData or INA for the communication. After that, the client will communicate directly with the ABAP front-end server by issuing the HTML and OData request through an established HTTPS connection. Then the data and the services from the ABAP backend server are provided to the ABAP front-end server through the OData services. The communication between the ABAP front-end server and the ABAP backend server is achieved using a trusted RFC connection. So the connection from the client to the reverse proxy will be using the HTTPS. Then from the reverse proxy, that is the web dispatcher, to the ABAP front-end server, it will be using the HTML and the OData request. Then from the ABAP front-end server to my ABAP backend server, it will be using the trusted RFC or the OData request. So the communication between the ABAP front-end server and the backend server is through the trusted RFC connection. All the app types will follow the same communication channels and the protocols. However, in addition, a web dispatcher is needed for the fact sheets and analytical app types. So basically my SAP web dispatcher is only required for the fact sheets and analytical app types. It is not required for a transactional app. Also, in the fact sheet landscape, a client can issue a INA request for such models using HTTPS. So basically the request from the client to the web dispatcher for INA, that is for the that INA request is basically for the search models which we use in the fact sheets. So when we will go further into the sessions, we will be discussing about what are the search models, what are the VDMs. So all these things we will be discussing in detail. So for now, this is the high level architecture and how the communication happens between each of the layer. Now, then it comes the architecture logical overview for the how till now we have seen the high level architecture. Now let's move into a bit detail of it, like what is the overall architecture logical overview for all the app types. So this slide is detailing me a landscape in which all the SAP Fiori app types are installed. So this is not basically specific to any single app type, it is for the all app types. Notice the progression of the app types basically. So the SAP Web Dispatcher is again the entry point for HTTPS or HTTP request. It can accept or reject the connections. So when it accepts a connection, it selects an appropriate application server and balances the load to ensure an even distribution across the servers. So basically my web dispatcher is taking the request and after that choosing the web server to which we can send that request. So this is what we discussed in detail about the web dispatcher functionality. So basically my web dispatcher is helping us to do the load balancing. So the complete UI layer consisting of the central UI add-ons, that is containing the SAP UI5 control library and the SAP Fiori Launchpad, the product specific UI add-ons, so like the one which contain the UI developments for the respective business suite products, like the ERP financial, ERP sales and division, ERP material management, then the CRM or the SCM. So the NetWeaver gateway is a development framework which will offers the development and generation tools to create the OData services to a variety of client development tools. So it will basically establishes a connection between SAP Business Suite data and target clients, platforms and programming framework. So basically first of all we have the SAP Web Dispatcher, then we have the front-end server components like which will be having all the UI components including all the add-ons, NetWeaver Central UI add-ons, then the SAP NetWeaver Gateway, then we have the SAP Backend Server. So my SAP ABAP Backend Server will contain the business logic and the backend data. So the OData service and the data model is packaged with the business suite enhancement pack by product. Then we have the Access Engine. So the Access Engine contains the SAP Fiori app content and the VDM, that is the virtual data model reuse content. This content is provided through the SAP HANA Live, which is included with SAP HANA as a separate package to be installed. So this is the complete architecture for all the SAP Fiori apps. That is the first of all we have the web dispatcher, then the front end server, then the back end server, then we have the NEDB or HANA. So why we say it as a NEDB or HANA? Because NEDB can be used for the transactional apps, that is only the transactional apps can run on NEDB. Fact sheets and analytical apps will require SAP HANA. And we use the search models only for the fact sheets, and only analytical apps will require HANA Access Engine, and additionally the KPI framework is needed for the smart business apps. So this is the overall architecture for my SAP Fiori all app type. Now let's go into the detail of the architecture, that is a logical overview for each of the app types. So this slide is explaining the logical overview for the transactional apps. So basically in this slide we will be having the SAP Web Dispatcher, that is a reverse proxy, which is again the entry point for the HTTP request, which it can accept or reject the connections. So the functionality of the Web Dispatcher is again the same which we have discussed till now. Then the central UI add-on contains the SAP UI5 control library and the SAP Fiori Launchpad. The product-specific UI add-ons will contain the UI developments for the respective business suite products such as the ERP, SD, financial, material management, CRM or SCM. Then again we have the SAP NetWeaver Gateway, which is a development framework which offers the development and generation tools to create the OData services to a variety of client development tools. It will be establishing a connection between the SAP Business Suite data and the target clients, platforms and programming framework. So we are using the OData services. OData services is basically like a kind of protocol, we can say, which will be like exposing the data which is stored in the database, and it will be exposing it to the other applications. So when we will go further into the detailed session, so we will discuss like what is OData and how we create the OData services, how we can change them as per the requirement. So we will discuss that in the later sessions. Now let's move to the logical overview of the fact sheets. So what is a fact sheet? So now in the logical overview of the fact sheets, so we can see in this slide that we have the search models, which is a new thing added, right? So if I compare the transactional apps and the fact sheets, so there were no such models which were there in my transactional apps, but we use the search models for the fact sheets. Now we have the if we compare the database, then in transactional apps it can be HANA or any DB. It means that my transactional apps can run on either SAP HANA or they can run on any database. But for the fact sheets we only have SAP HANA. That is, there is no choice of using any other database except for SAP HANA for fact sheets. So it is the architecture is almost similar to the transactional architecture in terms of the architecture and the components, except the SAP HANA DB, which is required in order for the search model part of the fact sheets to work. So the data requested from the fact sheets is pulled directly from the HANA database through the search models. So this is basically my logical overview for the fact sheets. Now let's move to the next slide, which is for the logical overview for analytical apps. So my analytical apps and the smart business apps, so basically they are making use of the HANA Access engine. So in the fact sheets we use the search models, and for the analytical apps we use the HANA Access engine. The UI for the analytical or the smart business apps are still rendered via the ABAP front-end server. So it means that still we will be using the ABAP front-end server to store the UIs, that is the user interface components. Then the SAP Web Dispatcher is configured to recognized OData for analytical apps. If it's request for analytical slash the smart business apps, the OData call will get routed directly to the HANA Access engine. That is, if my request is coming either for the analytical or the smart business apps, my OData call will be directly getting routed to the HANA Access engine. The data for analytical and smart business apps come from the HANA through the Access engine. SAP Fiori leverages the Access engine by using the virtual data models. So we will be discussing virtual data models later on in more detail. Within the Access engine there are two components: the HANA Live app content for the respective business suite and the smart business component with the KPI modeler. Within the HANA Live content, the VDM reuse content exists, which can be modified for extensibility purposes. The front-end server is leveraged for analytical apps for the Launchpad and the KPI framework. So this is like about the architecture, the logical view of the architecture for analytical apps. So similar to the my fact sheets, my analytical apps will also need a HANA database as a compulsion or as a mandatory option. There is no way that we can run our fact sheets or the analytical apps on any other database except for SAP HANA. And the reason for that is because my fact sheets, they need the search models which work only with SAP HANA, and my analytical apps, they need the virtual data models which work with the HANA Access engine. So till now we have discussed the different app types, the Fiori app types, like the transactional apps, fact sheets, and the analytical apps. Then we discussed the high level architecture of the SAP Fiori landscape, then how the communication between the different layer happens, then the logical overview for all apps, and then the individual app types. So now let's move into the system now and see how it looks like in the system. So this is my Fiori system in which I have the Fiori front end and the backend server installed. So first of all, I have to log into my system using the SAP logon. So in this we have the Fiori backend and the Fiori front end server on the separate systems. So this we will be covering, this is the part of the deployment options. So we will be covering this later on, like what all deployment options we have, what all are the recommended one. So all these things we will be covering in the next session. So let me log into the front end component or the backend component. So my backend component will be actually containing all my OData services. So my OData services, that is which are the logic, the business logic which will be getting from the database. So all these things will be stored in my Fiori backend system, and all my UI components, they will be stored in the front end system. So if first of all, if I log into my front end server, so I'll just give the username and the password. So this is my home screen. So in the favorites we can add the transactions which we are like using frequently, like we have the UI theme designer, we have the like the transaction to activate the OData service for the launchpad or the launchpad customization. So all the transactions which we use frequently, that we can add under the favorites. Then like we have to check like which all components are installed and what is the status of them. For that we need to go to the system, then we have to go to the status. Now we have to click on this magnifying glass which will show me all the components which are there in my system. So this is my front end component basically. So this is my front end server, so it will be having all my front end components. So we can see this component which is the most important component for the SAP Fiori, that is SAP_GWFND, which is a SAP Gateway Foundation. Then we have the SAP UI component. SAP UI component is basically my user interface technology component. So these two components are very important if we are working on SAP Fiori. Now let's scroll down and I'll show you the front end components which we need to add on the front end server. So if we just scroll down further, yes, so all these components which we can see starting from the UI, right? So all these components are my UI front-end components which need to be installed for a particular app type into my SAP Fiori front-end server. So I have this component UI GLT001 which is for the GL trade. Then we have the UI SPSCA which is for the ISP SCA. Similarly, we have this component for the travel, for the UIs, for the HCM application, then for the travel application. So all these things which are required, which we need to use for the front end, so all those components, all those UI components we need to have in my front end server. Now if I want to check the installed product version, I can go here and I can see what is the version of my SAP system. So we have the EHP 7 for SAP ERP 6.0, which I'm using for my front-end server. Then we have the SAP ERP release 2005 and ERP 6.0. So these are my server is EHP 7 and ERP 6. So this is basically about the front-end component. So in the next session we will also see like how we need to decide which component we need to use, which UI component we need to use for a particular app type, how we need to get that information, then how we need to get that component uploaded on the front-end server. So I will just close my front-end server as I am done with it, and then we will log in into the back-end server. So now we have the Fiori backend server. So my Fiori backend server will actually be having my business logic. So I'm just logging in into the Fiori backend. I'm just entering the username and the password. Now in the same way we did in the front-end server, we can add the favorites, we can add the frequently accessed transactions under the favorites. That is, we have added the gateway service builder, the gateway client, and the activate and maintain services transaction under the favorites folder. So how we add that is like we need to just write down and then we can insert the transaction. So we can add up any transaction here and that will appear under my favorites. Now again, to see the backend components, we have to go to the system, then the status, and again we have to click on this magnifying glass. So we can see that we again we have the GWFND and UI installed on this server as well, which were similar to my front-end server. Now if we scroll down further, so we will be if we go below, so we will be able to see the components which are there, my backend components for the SAP Fiori. So all these which are starting with the SRA, so these all are the OData components which we need to install in our backend server if we want to implement any of the Fiori app type. So we can see here the description, the short description of that particular component. We can check the release of it, we can check the SP level of it. Like here if you see, we have a SRA 001 which is actually for the approved purchasing contracts. So this is my OData service for approved purchasing contracts. Now similarly we have the different OData services which are installed on this system, like the create travel expenses, travel request, payslip lookup, my benefits, travel expense. So whichever component, whichever app type, whether it can be a transactional app, it can be analytical app, it can be a fact sheet or anything. So and everything what you are installing, so there must be a OData service and a UI component associated with that. So first of all, you need to add those components to your front-end server and to your back-end server. So this way you will be adding all those components here and you will be able to see the complete list of OData services which are like added to your server at a particular time. So we can see that we have here a few more examples like the create purchase order status, track shipment, purchase order status in process. So all these things are applied and these components are loaded onto my this server. Now similar way we can check for the installed product version. So we can see like which all version which all products and what is the release, what is the service pack. So all these things you can see under the installed product versions. So this is about the front end and the back end server, like how we need to configure the front end and the back end server, how we need to add the components to it. So basically to configure the front end and the back end server, this is mainly the task of the basis people, and as a Fiori developer we need to work on the app types, like if there is any customization required or if there are any components which we need to install. So all these things we should know as a SAP Fiori developer. So I'll just go back to my slides. So basically what we have discussed today is that we have discussed the SAP Fiori app types, we have discussed the high level architecture, the architecture for all app types, then the architecture for individual app types. Then we have seen like what is the benefit of a front end server, of a back end server, of a gateway server, a dispatcher. So and then we have seen in the SAP Fiori live system like how we have how we can check the components, where various UI components and the OData components which are installed onto my backend and the front end server. So this is all for this session. Thank you.